non-duality, balance, and wonder. Have you engaged in the art of not knowing? Do you have a practice around not knowing? Or do you have still a feeling when you do not have the answers, when you are faced with things you don't know, do you have a constant something is wrong, a constant discontent, a constant discomfort? Newsflash. Life and being on this human journey and the spiritual practice is an adventure in not knowing, isn't it? I feel like I could have stopped exploring at the first quote that was shared in the first chapter from Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 3:18. Richard Rohr shared, "Make no mistake about it. If any of you think of yourselves as wise, you must learn to be ignorant first, and then you can become wise." Amen? I mean, really, truly, we can either follow the path of arrogance and become pompous or become so self-inflated, so I know everything, that we do not have a beginner's mind, that we step out of the practice of being learners and explorers on a spiritual journey. We can become so uncomfortable with the wonder in life and sitting with wonder and honoring wonder that we begin to solidify ideas and make up answers even when we don't have them. Do you hear that? Even when we don't have them. And what happens is that the ego mind loves answers. The ego mind does what it does. It likes to define, it likes to categorize, it likes to solve, it likes to know good, bad, gray areas, not so fun for the ego mind. But is it life full of it? On so many levels. Full of it. So how do we engage in our practice of beholding the awakened consciousness among us and within us? And can we invite a deeper practice around our sense of wonder, being in the question, allowing the quest and the question to emerge and not making them wrong? Let's breathe into that. So often we make ourselves wrong if we don't have the answer. We make others wrong if we can't put them into a category, or they don't fit into ours. We make the world wrong if we can't solve the questions that we categorize as problems. And we make God wrong when we don't have understanding and when we have such intense discomfort with the wonder in life. We can tend to project it onto anything that will help ease the discomfort. I've told the story before about a Native American culture. It was shared with me by the Reverend Temple Hayes that doesn't even have the word why in their vocabulary. That the word why isn't even taught to children. I mean, what happens if you just take out that word? It's like half your conversations have to shift. Like, really pay attention to it this week. Think about what shifts when I'm having conversation. If I won't ask the question why, if I say it is no longer available to you, psyche, nope, you don't get to ask why. Let me just try. I mean, I think probably a week is all any of us could really handle right now for starting that quest. But just take out the word why for 1 week and watch the mind. How comfortable are you living in the question? Life's questions. I was recently on a little adventure with Reverend Brenda Arrett and Martha Creek, and we were having all sorts of incredible, engaging conversations. And And one thing that stood out to me is this reflection on our own spiritual journey and our own lives. And this story that was retold to me about a mentoring moment where it was being shared that in spiritual counseling appointments, right, you might have someone sharing things going on in their lives, right? The problems or the woes or the things that are unsolvable. And to someone that has a mind or a psyche or a paradigm that says, in order to be helpful, I need to solve. In order to be okay, we need to categorize. In order to have peace, this needs to be resolved. That psyche, that mind can be frozen like a deer in headlights when faced with spiritually supporting someone who is in the midst of intense questions that appear to be unsolvable or that can only be navigated by the one asking them. And so this mentoring moment, as it unfolded, ended with a demonstration of an example in a counseling session where someone shared and where the support lead just leaned in with love and compassion to the great question and said, I don't know. I don't know the answers. What? You're supposed to be the helper. You're supposed to be the solver. I'm coming to you to feel better. You don't know the answers and you're comfortable saying, I don't know the answers. You're comfortable with being an I don't know. What a leader. How humble. How wise. I don't know your answers, but I will walk with you on the journey. I will support you feeling grounded. I am here. You are not alone. But let's not mistake it that my role is to fix you, your life, or to get your understanding for you. I am here to be with you in unfolding what that discomfort feels like and what peace feels like, and holding your hand as you take that walk. Sometimes life is more about living into the question, refining it, reflecting on even what the question tells us. Do you know there's a whole practice around looking at the questions we ask? Because if you look at your questions, you can find your consciousness. Look at the caliber of questions you ask, and you will find your consciousness. You will find your pain body. You will find your triggers. You will find your education. You will find your history. You will find your religion. You will find your dogma. You will find your limits. You will find your injuries. You will find your strength. You'll find your power. You'll find your peace. You'll find your awakening. Our questions can guide us. Our sense of wonder can guide us, can ground us. And in fact, sometimes when we take that deep dive into our sense of wonder, we realize that it's really fluid and we don't have to have the answers. That it's more about the journey and it's more about the dance. Richard Rohr invites us, the author of The Naked Now, into the power of wonder, and how actually staying in wonder and having awareness around our drive for answers can be a grounding part of this practice. We're taught in our culture that we must seek and we must find and we must solve. And sometimes we even celebrate it when we've arrived at answers, when we land on answers and we won't change our minds. I know what I think about this, and I'm standing in it. I may have been 19 when I first stood in it, but by God, I'm going to go to my grave standing here. This is my what? You fill in the blank. This is my political party. This is my belief about XYZ. This is my definition of other people. This is my paradigm on what about life. Life is suffering. Life is hard. Life is XYZ. You fill in the blank. We celebrate that sometimes when we won't change our minds. In politics, some people call it a good thing. With forgiveness work, not such a good thing. If we don't change our minds, are we expanding our perspectives? If we don't change our perspective, we don't learn. And if we aren't learning, how can we grow? Richard Rohr says, we moved from wondering to answering, which has not served us well at all. He spoke those words in reference to the history that the Franciscans and the Dominicans had with debating. So they used to debate these spiritual ideas, these theological ideas, and they would have these lively and sometimes saucy debates. And it was okay to have these debates. No one was left out of the fold, he says. It was acceptable to be questioning and living in the wonder. And then he said that practice degenerated into just needing answers. And I think we know what has happened from that point in history to now. The practice degenerated into just needing answers. He says we moved from wondering to answering, which has not served us well at all. Do you hear that? Can you feel that? Maybe you were a part of something, a movement, an idea, whatever it was that moved from being in the question and having space to being rigidly defined. And you decided, I'm out. I'm out. There's no longer space for me in this. Take me out of the game. Exclusive, not inclusive. The emergence of finding answers and the concept of, even just the concept of being right, led us to these paradigms of debating, defining, arriving, and that being more valuable than the art of wonder, the process, the journey. Feel that with me for a second, even just saying those words. How does your body feel? How does your mind feel? How does your soul feel when I say the words defining, debating, arriving on the right answer, categorizing? Now, how do you feel when I say the art of wonder, or living in the wonder, the process, the journey? For me, one feels more expansive. One feels safer. One feels like there's space to explore. I believe the spiritual practice and our ethics and our humanity, our inclusivity, our tolerance, our power of perspective and the value of it, our understanding and harmony, all of those things suffer when we focus solely on the debate, define, arrive paradigm. I was talking to Reverend Deborah Johnson of my Association of Global New Thought, AGNT Leadership Council, at an AGNT Speaks conversation that was live in this last month. And she talked about her history and her background and profession. But one of the things she shared was that she has a lot of practice doing debates. Some of you may have done debates. I think I did debate once. I was terrified. Like, I don't know why, because that's what I do now, which is very weird. And I was not interested in really doing it. I had one class in one room, and I must have somehow figured out how to get out of that, because all I have is the memory of like literally one day when I was doing it and for 5 minutes. But I didn't like the argumentative part of it. I didn't like I have to overpower you and shut yours down. But what she said was the gift of that, the gift of debate, is that you are given a topic and you're given a side, and your job is to share that side, to give the reasons, to give the perspective, to like make it come alive so you can convince everybody, this is how it is, this is what it is. And then a second later, you're on the other side. You're on the other side. And your job, your success lies in your ability to make the opposite perspective come alive. To show from that perspective how true, how right, how passionate, how valuable it is. Do you know that there was a time in our history in the United States of America where the news was not considered entertainment? It was reclassified as entertainment. There is a law kind of little thing, whatever, that shifted, and the news became classified as entertainment. So it didn't as much matter if it wasn't factual or if it was one-sided. But before that, reporters and news stations had a responsibility to share perspectives, to make sure something wasn't just one-sided. There is nothing per se inherently wrong with constructs, but they become problematic when we forget we created them. There's nothing inherently wrong with perspectives and perceptions, but they become limiting when we forget we are creating them, and they are not a solid, rigid truth. They are an experience. When we forget we create these things and we arbitrarily follow them, when they're not honoring humanity, diversity, divinity, or co-creating a world that works for all, we suffer. It makes sense for so much of life to go about organizing and defining and classifying. It makes sense. It makes life easier. You know, now I know what kind of trees we have, because all of those leaves, they're different kinds of trees, and I can define them. I can talk about them. I'm a human. I have words. And if I'm going to connect with you, I want to connect with you with words and have understanding. And so we begin the process of defining things, of organizing things, of classifying things. But what also happens when we do that is we limit things. And it only becomes a problem when we forget that we set the limit. There is a great body of work by the transpersonal psychologist and author Ken Wilber. He wrote the book No Boundary and a plethora of other books, but he goes into this idea of boundaries versus lines. So a silly little example I'll just make up right now is if I am teaching my daughter to organize her things, right? And I want order in the home and I want to teach her order, I might say, all of the dolls and stuffed animals go on this shelf. All of the dolls and the stuffed animals go on this shelf. So then she comes to an item. Are you a doll? You are not a doll. Are you a stuffed animal? You are not a stuffed animal. If you are, if you go within this definition, you go here. If you do not, you are excluded. Now, if we have a beginner's mind, or if we think like a child, or if we allow ourselves to embrace our ignorance for a moment, we can recognize that that is an arbitrary classification. I could have said, and I could have come from a paradigm where all pink things go on this shelf, or all soft things go on this shelf, or all things that are of a smaller size than this go on this shelf. And I could have classified and categorized things in an entirely different manner. The fact that I picked stuffed animals to go on this shelf, stuffed animals of all sizes, stuffed animals of all hardnesses, stuffed animals of all colors. I wish I could show you my shelf. Wait. This is what I'm talking about. All of these need to go in the same space when they get put away for my brain to be happy in my home. That is completely arbitrary. When we forget that and we become rigid, we don't allow ourselves to co-create what works for us. So I am not teaching my daughter this so that for the rest of her life, she has to keep all stuffed animals in a certain place. If she discerns at some point that she wants to, prop them up from window sills and put them on chairs and in her home someday, do whatever she wants to do with them, organize all the red ones together and all the blue ones in another place, then go for it, for the love of God, go for it. It is when we solidify, and this is a silly little example, right? We're talking about stuffed animals, but this creates war. This creates racism. This causes suffering and death. And it makes a hell out of heaven when it is expanded to all the paradigms it infects. So Ken Wilber's book reminds us that these distinctions are actually fluid. We could go by other definitions. We could look at other things, and that is part of the spiritual practice. It's to open our eyes, open our visions, open our minds, so that we can recognize that all of these powers to define, classify, and categorize are here to serve us. We are not here to serve them. They're here to serve humanity, and they're here to serve our divinity. They're part of our intelligent divine and part of our spiritual ability to expand them. What if we didn't value winning so much? What if we didn't value being right so much? What if we weren't so much in the business of creating boundaries? How could that change things? How would that change your life and your world? Richard Rohr poses some questions of his own when he reflects on the power of wonder, and he says this: I have wondered why the reasons for most wars in history, reasons that seemed so compelling at the time, look foolish, wrong, or often naive to later generations. He says, I have wondered why the major religions rarely produce many active peacemakers. He goes on to say, perhaps you have asked yourself similar questions. Why do people become so attached to political parties and habits of thoughts that they even vote against with their own self-interest and cherished beliefs? Why do so many people have a clearer idea of what they are against than what they are for? You might wonder why in politics we call people strong simply because they never change their mind. You wonder why the same storyline of good guys and bad guys is the narrative of most movies, novels, operas, and theater. You wonder why people who hate religion tend to attack it with the same dogmatism that they hate in religion. Do you have wonderings? Do we have assumptions And can breaking through those assumptions allow us to experience more peace in a world of wonder? Invite us into making less wrong and saying yes to exploring more and making space. You know, the part that he talked about around stories and the narrative around stories has been so clear to me in the last 3 years. I noticed it before, but I notice it on a whole new level now. That yes, most stories that we tell and that kids grow up with have a bad guy and a good guy, or a bad gal and a good gal. Most stories have a big problem, or most stories teach that life is suffering. Now, again, there's not so much something inherently wrong with that if we remember we created it. If we remember that there are other stories to tell based on other paradigms, entirely different worldviews, life views, and spiritual views. Those stories can be helpful when they are used to address something that has been experienced. Then they can help someone crawl out of it, which is no doubt probably why we wrote so many of these stories, because so many are suffering in these paradigms and trying to crawl out. And so those stories give us tools for getting out of the ditch. But there is a problem when we begin from birth to death to raise a generation in the myopic view of these stories, of these paradigms. Because what happens then is we begin to teach that these paradigms are truth. We teach from the framework and we birth people into these stories, so they become these stories and they do not realize there are other options for living life that may bring about more peace. When we use these stories to meet our children and ourselves when they have these experiences, rather than to train their minds to live within the myopic paradigm that is actually optional and a choice we forgot we made, we can liberate humanity. You may have noticed that Disney has been evolving. In fact, I remember years ago when I saw the movie Maleficent, I noticed one of the first shifts where the villain is also the hero, where it doesn't have to be someone outside of the villain that comes to save them. It's not the paradigm of the prince coming to save the princess or the king coming to save the queen, but in fact, they wrote a narrative and a dialogue where it all unfolded within the psyche of the being herself. She was both the hero and the villain. Very Joseph Campbell, hero's journey. It's like all of the archetypes began emerging as the being themselves. There are other kids' films that have emerged that show the same thing with emotions, that, you know, rather than a good guy and a bad guy, it's like, I have my little angry voice and I have my little kind voice. I have my peaceful voice and I have my crazy voice. So we are evolving, yet still often those paradigms have those basic concepts. So even though they're progressing and they're evolving, it's still that basic premise. And it comes from the fall, it comes from the garden. Eve ate the apple, man, and she is still eating the apple. There's a metaphysical take on that story, and there are other ways of being. There are other paradigms to live into. There are a couple of little kids shows that I like because they don't go into the exact same paradigm. The little show Tumbleleaf, if you have a little one in your life, the show Tumbleleaf and kind of the show Bug Diaries, they go on adventures and they explore together. They uncover things rather than hurt each other, cause problems, create issues, create paradigms that teach this is how the world is. When we create and forget we have created, we are not honoring our birthright. We are limiting ourselves, and it is ours to emancipate ourselves from those limitations. Meditation is the greatest tool to do that, because meditation opens the mind, meditation expands perspective, and so does questioning, so does living in the wonder. Do you know there's a conversation going on right now in the unity movement? And it's this question: is unity Christian? Are you Christian? I do love engaging in those conversations. But what I don't love about them is that they take everyone who is unity, everyone who says, I am unity or I am new thought, and the dark side of that question is that they invite them into little camps. They invite them to run off into corners of beliefs that get solidified and grounded. They invite them into definitions that start creating an us and them paradigm. If you go this way, I'm in. If you go that way, I'm out. If you say that, you included me. If you don't say that, you excluded me. They begin to define and refine with the illusionary attempt to expand. Are you hearing what I'm saying here? The attempt is to expand. The attempt is to say, we need to get so clear on who we are. We need to define who we are so that we can grow and expand. And ironically, in the process, let's go ahead and go you, not you, this, but not that. Let's go ahead and dissect, divide, and exclude so that we can figure out what we're including so that then we can grow. I remember something that always stuck with me from Marianne Williams. Marianne Williams, and she said, the issue, and she was reflecting on her own participation in the consciousness of the movement, the issue with the kind of anti-war movement of the past was that we had the energy, we had the people, we had the marching, we were so powerful, but we were angry and we were standing against something rather than for something. So that idea of what I am excluding instead of what I am including. And I remember years ago, over 15 years ago, maybe 10, I was sitting in a sanctuary in the Silent Unity building with a convention of unity leaders. And we had Ian Lawton, who studied with great minds. He's from, I think, Australia, and he was here and he was doing a seminar with us and doing support with us for our movement in one of our conference bodies. And someone brought up the idea of, is unity Christian? And we need to solve this answer, and you need to help us because we haven't figured this out yet. I mean, we kind of, there are definitely Christians in unity, and there are definitely people that don't define themselves as Christians in unity. And we need to answer that question. And some people think this, and some people think that, and that, and it went on, offering him the question. And he said, if your question excludes who's here and who you are, it's too small. Your question is too small. Your wondering is too small. You cannot come from a dividing consciousness to birth more, just like I was referring to what Marianne was saying. So we have to ask ourselves a greater question in our movement. What do we have space for? What are we about? Unity has a gorgeous history. It is a gorgeous history. And it is completely normal and human to try to organize that, manage it, encapsulate it in a little definition that will fit perfectly in the Parliament of World Religions or in somebody's guidebook or in, the phone book under what kind of a church, what kind of a spiritual community. And I fully understand that desire to do that and the desire to grow and the need to be clear about what we're about. But I don't think we're about the answers and the definitions. I do not think we are about the answers or the definitions. And I stand on the shoulders of those who came before me when I say that we are about living in the wonder, we are about the experience, and we are about the questions. And living the questions. And making the space to dive into them freely from the level of consciousness where we find ourselves in each moment. From the history that I know, there was one time where people wanted a definition of unity. Give us a definition. And Connie Fillmore Bazzi found herself at the helm. And out of this whole practice that is unity, she said, I'll give you 5 things. Here's just 5. There's one power and one presence, God, the good omnipotence. It is within you. It is within everyone. It is the spark of divinity. It is the light. Through meditation, affirmation, and prayer, you engage your spiritual practice. There is a law of mind action. We draw things to us. We create through our perspectives. And action is essential. That it's not enough to know these truths. We must act on them. Those 5 things. And that's it. Now, that's not all. Charles Fillmore wrote voraciously. He was just writing and defining. And so we have what is heaven and hell, what is God, what is the Holy Spirit. We have a definition for just about everything in unity. Literally, you can look up, even people that are not in New Thought use our metaphysical Bible dictionary. I don't know how this man in his lifetime, in the dash between the years of which he lived, I do not know how he created the body of work that he did, but he did. And even people who are not in New Thought and not in unity use our metaphysical Bible dictionary to do Bible metaphysics, because cities are defined. People are defined. Everyone has a definition. And do you know what Fillmore also did at the same time as he defined and classified and talked about everything that is unity so much? What he did at the same time, in the other hand, without there being any conflict at all, he said, I reserve the right to change my mind. And those things were not in conflict. They were explorations. He understood, I believe, that he lived in a paradigm, in a construct, in a Christian world. And he often even defined things really as completely against the current Christian paradigm, but using the Christian language. Defined them and then went on to just keep talking. As if I defined that for you. I defined who Jesus is and what the Christ is. I defined Christianity for you. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Now I'm just going to keep using the word. And when you look at his definitions and when you look at his old sermons, through the roof, no walls on that sanctuary. fully expansive, and sometimes caught in the current paradigm and the structure of which he lived. But no doubt, he would embody the exploration today. And there was a foundational decision in the unity movement. And you can see it in how we engage young people and youth in our spiritual communities and in what we call spirit school. Our job is not to start pressing information down into them and pressing everything in. It is to draw it out. We have a value on teaching how to listen, how to learn, how to practice, how to go, as Charles Fillmore said, directly to headquarters, rather than creating a movement of people that can recite and define things that may serve to include and may serve to exclude. Richard Rohr says this. He says, in the West, religion became preoccupied with telling people what to know more than how to know. Telling people what to see more than how to see. We ended up seeing holy things faintly, trying to understand great things with a whittled down mind, and trying to love God with our own small, divided heart. He says, it has been like trying to view the galaxies with a $5 pair of binoculars. How uncomfortable is it for you to not answer that question? Is Unity Christian? How uncomfortable is it for you if some people have one answer and some people have another answer? I think that is the great gift of our movement. I truly do. And I understand, again, I understand the desire to grow it and the desire to define it. But as Richard Rohr says, when reflecting upon the evolution of Catholicism, he says, we moved from wondering to answering, which has not served us well at all. The practice degenerated to just needing answers. Richard Rohr goes on to say that these paradigms move us into a winning and losing consciousness. One must win and the other must lose. He says the concern in Tibetan Buddhism is not to achieve a conceptually perfect answer, which then has to be defended, but to call forth a happy, loving, aware, and perceptive human being. Is that not one type of salvation?